I'm pleased to see all participants again in this new year. And first of all, I would like to wish you all too. And I wish that you can catch all opportunities that in spite of the crisis that we are still facing, unfortunately, we should also try to focus in our personal life, in our professional life also, to what are the opportunities that can enable our personal life to grow and expand also our activities. Today's course will be shorter because unfortunately the second speaker, Margarita Kulash, for personal reasons cannot take part today to the webinar, so it will last 1 hour instead of 2 basically. And the reason why we had 2 specific contributions on leisure activities today was in a sense to try to compare 2 different approaches, one in UK and one in Croatia, that are trying to stimulate visitors to enjoy not only the museum, the 4-wall museum in itself, but also the entire territory which is around the museum and the heritage that the museum itself tries to promote. So we are basically with the presentation of Graham Boxer today, we will talk again about the concept of cultural landscape. We had already some contributions on eco-museums, extended museums, on public participation. And today, again, we will take into account this key concept of cultural landscape that was defined also in 2001 by UNESCO in the Convention for the World Heritage. The cultural landscape approach, the cultural landscape definition was made for one of the first time, but then it was in 2005, thanks to the Faro Convention, that it developed further. And a few years ago, exactly in 2016, for the 28th or 29th General Conference of ICOM, this definition was elaborated further. And so the concept of cultural landscapes include also, according to ICOM, the transformations that museums must implement if they want to play an active role in the territory. So that depends very much from their mission. And in many cases, as in the one of the National Waterways Museum of Ellesmere, this mission is definitely included in the statutory purposes of the institution. So I would like to conclude this short introduction by stressing again what is a possible definition of a collection to be combined with this approach of cultural landscape. The cultural landscape itself is a collection, which is not included in the museum, but it's a collection in a territory. So as a collection, a cultural landscape is truly a living collection that can be managed and preserved in its vitality, because it is not only by nature constantly changing and evolving, but because it also includes the people who inhabit it, whose very existence is determined by the perception they have of it. So this is a definition given by ICOM in 2016, and I think it's also a good introduction to what Graham Boxer will enable today to explore with this museum. Please, Sara, for introducing Graham.
Thank you very much, Roberto. Dear participants, I am very glad to have you here on our penultimate webinar of our training course. So I am very pleased today to introduce our speaker, which is Graham Boxer. And Graham a museum curator by training. He has worked in the UK cultural sector for over 30 years. His experience spans local authority, independent charities, and nationally funded organizations. Most of this time has been managing developmental projects, 5 new museums, and the restoration of St. George's Hall in Liverpool. He was on the management team for Liverpool's European Capital of Culture in 2008, coordinating community heritage and arts program. At the Canal and River Trust, Graham led on 2 refurbishment projects at the National Waterways Museum, Ellesmere Port. And he is now focusing on the development of the museum collections and archives. In a voluntary capacity, he serves on the board of Collective Encounters, a theatre for social change arts organization, and acts as a professional reviewer for applications for associate membership to the Museum Association. Today, Graham will speak about water, heritage, and well-being, engaging audiences away from the museum. Dear Graham, thank you for being here today. I'm really glad to leave you the floor.
Thank you very much, Zara, for that introduction. And good afternoon, I think it is. It might be a different time where you are, but hello, everybody, anyway. It's a pleasure to meet you. And I know the second speaker can't be here, but I promise not to speak for 2 hours. So I hope that's okay with you. You don't want to listen to me for 2 hours at all. I'm going to share my screen if I work out how to do this. There it is. I might need to, let me just go back before I do that. Sorry, I'm on the wrong page. Go back up. Always technical difficulties with technology, isn't there? But we will get
no
it right.
problem, Graham. We are used to it, so
right.
We're all used to.
Let's share that. Good. I hope you can all see that.
Yes, I confirm we can see.
Fantastic. So what I wanted to talk to you today is really about those links between water, the culture of water, the culture of heritage, and well-being, and how actually both can be used to improve individual well-being, community well-being, and even national well-being. Now, this is part of the program that you're all undertaking called Beyond Museums, Tools for Promoting the Natural and Cultural Water Heritage. And what I want to sort of touch upon in the next sort of 40 minutes or so is a bit about the Canal and River Trust, which is the organisation I work for, a bit about the museums that we look after and the collections that we keep. The history of the canals in Great Britain, because I think that gives a fair bit of context to the setup that we have over here. A bit on social and individual well-being and how that's been impacted by COVID, and how we're trying to use cultural heritage to address the issues that we are facing in this country. And particularly, I hope to have some practical examples or tools that could be used for promoting the cultural water heritage. I'm not saying that these tools are new or novel or inspirational. I'm sure many of you are using them, but I thought I'd give you a bit of an insight into how we're using those in the Canal and River Trust. So let's start off then. Who are the Canal and River Trust? Well, they are a charity that looks after 2,000 miles of canals and navigable rivers across England and Wales. They are relatively new in being formed. They were formed in 2012, and they are today one of the 4 largest cultural charities in the UK. Before the trust the Canal and River Trust was formed, the canals were maintained by an organisation called British Waterways. And they were very much part of the government. They were completely government funded. But after the economic crisis in the UK, and I think most of Europe as well, around 2009, 2010, the British government were looking to make as many of the organisations they were funding at arm's length and make them self-sustainable, self-supporting, to reduce the costs, of course, to the national government. So that's what they did. We get a grant from the government, from the Department of the Environment, Farming and Agricultural Affairs. And we also have to generate our own income from all sorts of activities and sources. For us as an organisation, we know that that grant we get from the national government is up for renewal in 2025. So we want to position ourselves to make sure that the government really wants to continue funding us, that they recognise the value that we bring and what we can offer to society in all sorts of ways. So we maintain that grant from them. And that's important because we do think that we have a very real role to play. We're not just about keeping the water in the canals. We're not just about maintenance, but we are about making lives healthier and happier. We are about bringing communities together to value and help their society. And we feel what we're trying to say is that we can do that by getting people to care for their local waterway. We want to create those places and routes, those corridors, if you like, that can be enjoyed by everyone. So our vision is very much around living waterways, transform places and enriches lives. By caring for our waterways and securing their future, we know from the research we've done, and I'll come back to that in a minute, that we can help to improve the well-being of our nation. And we do this in a range of ways. In part of the study we undertook to realise this, we did a lot of research and produced an outcomes report in 2017 that looked at all the various activities, how people got engaged, and the things that we could do to improve people's lives and sense of well-being. We're going to come back to this later, but let's say for now that we see it as our responsibility to ensure that the waterways are relevant and valued in the 21st century, and that they do make a positive difference to communities. And we do this, for, I suppose, not selfish reasons. We want to be part of that enabling society to have a better way of life, as it were. But we do this because we want to be of importance and relevant to people, because we know if we are, then the government will continue to give us the grant that we need to carry on undertaking our activity. So as well as this responsibility for 2,000 miles or 3,000 kilometres roughly of canals, the Canal and River Trust is also responsible for the National Waterways Museum. It's primarily housed over two sites, one at Ellesmere Port, which is an old transshipment dock, and I'll talk a bit more about that, and the other one in Gloucester. Ellesmere Port is in the northwest of England, and Gloucester is in the southwest. We have other attractions around the canal network, and maybe some of you have been to them. Maurizio is certainly saying that he's been to Stratford, he knows Little Venice, so he may know some of the other sites, but we have a small museum at Stoke Bruin. We have a boat lift in Anderton, and there are other attractions and sites as well. But our ambition is not just to engage people with the collections at these sites, but to get people engaged with the collections around the network. And one of the reasons, not the only reason, but one of the reasons we want to do that is because of the collection's significance. The National Waterways Museum collection is the most comprehensive collection of items relating to the history of the waterways in England and Wales over the last 300 years. In the United Kingdom, there is not another like it at all. It contains over 10,000 objects, including about 60 boats, and we have nearly 200,000 archival items. Such is the collection's significance that, or importance, is that the Arts Council England has given it designated status as a collection which has national significance, and that's why we use the term National Waterways Museum. Again, to help you understand why this is so, I just want to briefly look at the history of the canals in England and Wales. If you think about it, every country has used navigable rivers at some time, and coastal routes were used, and that was because it was much easier to transport goods, particularly heavy goods or even fragile goods. It's much easier to transport those by water than by land. Well, certainly it was that until the invention of the railways and the modern roads, of course. And it was easier and cheaper as well. This picture is an engraving of the Bridgewater Canal, built in the 1760s, one of the earliest, if you like, industrial commercial purpose canals in England. And it's an engraving made in 1870 of the Bridgewater Canal crossing a river. I mean, this was quite something in the 1760s in this country, to think that they would build a passageway of water across a passageway of water. The canal was paid for by the Duke of Bridgewater and built by James Brindley. But the Duke of Bridgewater was looking for ways of getting coal from his mines in a place called Worsley, just outside Manchester, into the city centre. And he visited canals in France and saw those and how they worked. There was another canal in the northwest called the Sankey Canal, and he went and looked at that and eventually invited James Brindley to come up with a design of a canal that could serve his purposes and transport his heavy goods, his coal, much easier than it could be by road. And the thing is, you have to, I mean, I'm sure this is obvious, but I'll say it anyway. One horse pulling a boat of coal or heavy material could carry 10 times more than a horse and cart. So it was much more efficient way of transporting these goods. And in fact, so successful was this method that within 1 year, the cost of coal in Manchester had halved, because the cost to getting the coal into Manchester was so much cheaper. Oops, go on to the next picture. So this picture is taken from a website, and you can see on the page the web address. I think Sarah is going to send this presentation out as a PDF, so you will get all these links. But Cambridge University have done a lot of work looking at the history of population and social structure in England and Wales over the last 400 or 500 years. And they've done a section on transportation. And if you find that, go to that page, transport, and scroll down, there is an interactive map, which this still is taken from, which shows how the canals developed over between 1600 and 1911. And it's really good. I do recommend you go and have a look. It's worth watching, because where you can see all those blue lines, there was nothing, maybe a little bit round the edges in 1600. And as you click on it and it goes through the years very slowly, it takes about 2 minutes, I think, to go all the way through. But as you click on it and go through the years, you can see more and more blue lines appear. Now, they don't appear at a regular rate. It's very slow up until 1760. And 1760, if you like, is the start of the Industrial Revolution in Britain. And the reason coal was so important, I should have added, is because of the development of the steam engine and the need of coal to power the steam engine, to power the factories and power the mills. So in 1760, you see this acceleration in the growth of canals. And then by about 1830, it almost stops again. And that's because in 1830, we have the invention of the railway, and the railways start to take over that form of transport, because not only was it cheaper, it was faster. But it doesn't stop canals completely. Canals were still important for large, heavy goods, raw materials, because they were cheaper than the railways at that stage. And so we have the development of the canal continues, but at a much slower rate from about 1830 into the 20th century. But if you like, the writing was on the wall that early. And although the canals were continuing to be used, their significance and their importance to industrialization was declining. Even so, this is Ellesmere Port, where one of the National Waterways Museum sites is. This is Ellesmere Port in 1900. And you can just see how big and important, active it is. I mean, this is only a small section of it in the photograph. But on the left, you've got pig iron. I think on the right is, I think that's a warehouse, a shed for lime. You've got flour mills at the back there. And you've got a mix of seagoing boats and barges. And that's what made Ellesmere Port so important, because it was a transshipment port. It was where raw materials could be brought in on big boats. Some went to Liverpool, which is just across the Mersey from Ellesmere Port, and then they were loaded into Mersey flats, which brought them across to here, and then into narrow boats, so that the cargo could be taken around the country, particularly to the Midlands, to Birmingham, because that was, if you like, the industrial heartland for us. Lots of steel making and manufacturing taking place there, but also to the Manchester region, which was a very important textile district. However, even by 1900, the importance of canals was declining, if you like, and the trade was being squeezed. This was also associated with the end of the industrial period, if you like. You know, we're in the post-industrial period now, and it was very slow and gradual, but it was certainly started from around the late 19th century onwards, and canals were affected by that. So much so that by 1970, Ellesmere Port was in the condition you can see in that picture on the left. And this is partly due to industrialization, and as I say, partly due to the development of railways and road transport, so that the canals no longer had such an important purpose as they had back in the 1760s. However, by the 1950s, the canals were starting to be recognized for the recreational use they could provide. People were buying and hiring boats for holidays, And the Inland Waterways Association was formed, which is sort of a volunteer body established to bring people together that were enjoying the canals, and also to lobby government to safeguard their future, because the canals were at risk. As you can see, Ellesmere Port was at risk. I mean, to some extent, this started slightly earlier. I think the canals have always had a little bit of leisure activity taking place. But there was a real movement in from say the 1940s through to the 1970s to start to safeguard and protect the industrial heritage that we were losing. And this was at its height, certainly in the 1970s. And the picture on the right shows volunteers at Ellesmere Port, brick by brick, rebuilding the site so that it could be turned into a museum. It opened as the Boat Museum in 1976, completely volunteer run. And in 1985, it was the European Museum of the Year. So it was very successful. And the same could be said for the canals as well. You know, we have canals which are, you know, beauty on the doorstep, if you like. They are green and blue corridors which are there for people to enjoy. Now, I have to say, the canals haven't always been like this. And it's only through a lot of hard work by many people and organisations, including the Inland Waterways Association, the British Waterways, and recently the Canal and River Trust over the last 10 years, that we have started to tidy up the canals and make them more accessible and more usable. I can remember in the late 70s with some friends of mine going on a canal boat holiday through Wolverhampton and Birmingham along the Staffordshire and Worcester Canal, and some of the areas were pretty run down and pretty rough, not necessarily nice to see. There are still a few areas like that, but to a great extent that's changed, and we have these wonderful places to enjoy for recreation. I referred to the report, the outcomes framework report that we prepared in 2017. We did a lot of research on who actually was using our canals, because the British Waterways focused very much on keeping the canals maintained, mainly for boats to navigate. And yet from our research, we know, and I don't know if you can read the detail on this slide, but certainly have a look at it when the PDF comes through. People on boats make up a very small proportion of the users of our canal network. When we did this research, during a typical 2-week period, there would be 4.3 million people visiting or using the canals in one way or another. Now, of that, I think it was only about 500,000 were boaters. 2 million at least were walkers, people just walking along the canal. Another million, or 1 million people were walking a dog. Now, those two might overlap slightly, but essentially we get a much bigger spectrum of people using the canals than those that we immediately think are the primary users, boaters. It's not so. The canals can be used for fishing, for running and jogging, for cycling, for walking the dog, just going and sitting and enjoying the view. So there was a lot of use out of these canals. They were attracting people. And we also discovered from the research that we did that a lot of the communities living within 1 kilometre of our waterways were experiencing levels of deprivation and perhaps didn't have the best well-being experience. If you like, they had well-being inequalities. Now, that varied in different areas. But basically, what we were recognizing was two things. First of all, that we had a lot of people living very close to a canal. Now, not everybody was using those canals. I know I said that the canals provide that opportunity for beauty and enjoyment and relaxation, but not everybody was using them. And in fact, some of those that live closest to the canals were in poor quality housing, were in disadvantaged, deprived areas with lots of disadvantages over more affluent and wealthier areas. So not only do we have a lot of people living near the canals, but we had a lot of people that had need of the canals that weren't using them. Part of that was because, yes, some canals were run down, some of them weren't attractive. A lot of people felt they were unsafe to go to. So we've been looking at how we can turn that round, how we can get communities, these communities, to recognize that the canals that we look after, and we are very much sort of keeping in best condition as much as we can, and restoring and refurbishing and improving, are there for people to use. You know, it's a free of charge access, and we can't even say that about our museums. Our National Waterways museums, we charge for people to go in, but the canal network is free of charge for anybody to go along and enjoy. It's almost like a natural health service. You know, we know, I'm sure you know, a lot of research has been done about the physical and mental well-being that being by water can provide. There's something therapeutic about it. It's something enjoyable about it. And where we have water like this, be it docks, be it canals, be it rivers, there's something to cherish and look after. We also realized that our canal network could provide a safe, healthy, and sustainable route for people to use. You know, much safer perhaps for people to walk along the canal to school than it is perhaps to walk along a busy road with traffic. Now, we knew that perceptions were different amongst many people living in the country. Some saw the canals as where they might get mugged or robbed. So it's very much about how we make those changes to improve the environment so that people could start to enjoy the canal side and at the same time improve their well-being. There is another point here, which again, I'll touch upon later, but that is about that sense of belonging, that sense of identity and place. You know, a lot of research has been undertaken in what gives a place its identity. And we know it's that mix, it's that balance of heritage and modern, and getting that balance right. And you can see in this picture here, the old warehouses behind, which have been converted to a modern use. It gives that real richness of built environment, and also it creates a place where people can feel they belong to. It's something they enjoy, it's something they might want to bring visitors to. So that sense of belonging in a place is strengthened by having that mix of heritage and modern buildings and being a safe place to live. Well-being isn't just confined to canals or waterways or docks. Museums over the last 15, 20 years in the UK have been exploring the contribution they can make to well-being in society as well. And again, museums have a unique asset. They have the collections which they can use to engage people. One of the key projects, which again, the links here, is at Liverpool Museums, National Museums Liverpool, was called House of Memories. And that was set up primarily to work with people suffering from dementia. And what they found was that by using the objects in the collection, by getting people to think about their distant past and these objects, the objects actually acted as triggers to help them remember. And that sense of remembering and understanding and knowing really helped their well-being. And it's a very powerful example of how museums can use their collections to help with that well-being agenda. There is another one. I used to be the director of the Imperial War Museum North, and we used to have sessions in our museum for veterans who had served in Afghanistan and Iraq War, and where they were suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder. We would have sessions, again, working with the collections, undertaking activities which actually help them to come to terms with that. And this has been very successful. It might be the same in where you are, but certainly in the United Kingdom, there has been a huge emphasis on the value of what we call social prescribing. And that is where someone is feeling unwell, they might have high blood pressure, or they might have mental health issues. Rather than prescribing drugs, or drugs might be appropriate, I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but rather than just prescribing drugs, look at the type of activity and things that people could do to help their own sense of well-being. And, you know, we've been working with the National Health and doctors to actually get that recognized. So rather than giving them a drug, how about joining a group? How about joining a walking group? How about undertaking another activity, either in a museum or on a canal, where it can actually, you get that sense of community, that sense of belonging, and it can help your own individual sense of well-being. So both these strands have an important role to play in society. And in fact, there is now, where you can find more information about this, an organisation called Culture, Health and Wellbeing Alliance. And again, the website link's on there. But that's brought together a group called Museums and Wellbeing, and another one, Arts and Wellbeing, into one. It's looking at that cultural approach holistically, if you like. The problem is, particularly from the museum point of view, is that COVID has had a major impact. I'm sure you're the same wherever you are. And the museums have been hit particularly badly, as you can see from this slide. And there are some museums, it's not too sure if they will reopen. The National Waterways Museum closed for some time. We're sort of partially open, but not completely, because people don't feel safe necessarily to go inside a building and go to a museum these days. So our visitor figures have dropped considerably, and for many museums, their income has dropped considerably. Ironically, what we have found, though, is that more people are using the canals. Not necessarily quite like this. I can't say that the picture on the left is a COVID-safe use of the canals. But what we found is that because they provide green, blue corridors, beautiful spaces in the open air, people can't go away on holiday. They are having to stay at home. The canals are becoming more used. They are providing that, you know, space for relaxation, recreation, and enjoyment. A space where they can feel safe, happy, and improve their well-being. Now, of course, this could also apply for heritage. We think of people using the canals because of the beauty on the doorstep, but as Heriberto said in his introduction, the cultural landscape isn't just about nature or beauty, it's about the heritage as well. And I don't think we've got time, even with an extra hour, to discuss whether the heritage externally is part of the collection, the museum collection, or not. But essentially, I agree with the essence of what Heriberto is saying. Heritage, like museums, like museum collections, adds to that sense of place, that sense of identity, of belonging, and therefore also adds to that perceived individual and community well-being. It can play that role. And certainly in the canals in England and Wales, we have a tremendous amount of heritage. It's over nearly 3,000 listed buildings, over 300 conservation areas, scheduled ancient monuments. And even if you were just to walk down the canal, you can see the heritage. I think it's a shame that not many people spot this, and it does need pointing out. But if you look at the grooves there, that's made by the ropes of numerous horses pulling narrowboats along the canal. And you sense that heritage and that history immediately. It just works in a way of communicating instantly what the past was like. And I think that's where Heriberto's right. These are items, these are objects that tell the story of our past, our shared past, and what's made our country, our environment, what it is today. So because we know that museum visits are down, and because we know that there is a wonderful story to tell on the waterways, and we have a wonderful story to tell in our collections, we've been looking at how we link these two up and what we can do in the future to start engaging audiences with the heritage, with the history, away from the museum site. Now, as I said at the start, this is nothing new. So please don't sort of roll your eyes and think, oh, there's a lot of things I'm sure you're doing. And I'm sure that in the discussion, you have some other ideas and suggestions you can offer. But let's start with the most obvious. And the most obvious is, of course, educational visits by groups, particularly of children, and a way of engaging and inspiring them with the history on their doorstep. We have a team of educators, teams called explorers. We have a coordinator who works nationally, but each of those teams now work in their regions, encouraging groups to visit and creating resources for them to use to get the most out of their visit when they go round. But there are other activities, particularly away from the museum site. One of the projects we did at Ellesmere Port, again about 4 or 5 years ago, was called Window on the World. And it was some new displays, but we also created a sort of app that people could take around the site, and they could hold up their phone at a particular point, and a character would tell them about the place or what they were doing. On the left, you can see all the characters. We did 5 characters altogether. And these are, or these were, or are, I should say, real people. They were people that from our research, from the census and the doc records, we know worked at Ellesmere Port round about 1900. So the gentleman in the front with his bowler hat was the manager of the slipway. His name was Levi Lindop. And we know that the slipway, which you can see in the middle picture there, was used for boats to come up on for repair. And with the technology, we've superimposed Mossdale on that slipway, and one of the characters talking about it. And then round by where Mossdale is, we had Hattie Price. And I'm going to try and play this. I'm hoping it's going to work, because what you do is, the reason she's in front of a blue screen is because it superimposes onto your smart tablet or phone, and you can see the picture behind. You can see the real buildings behind, but it looks like Hattie is talking in front of it. So let's just, if you don't mind, let's just have 2 minutes listening to what Hattie's got to say.
Annie, tell Fred, Mr. Lindop's on his way over from the slipway. She's coming to see our narrowboat. Brand new she is, just brought down for the shroppy today. Mr. Lindop's bought her. She's the first of 6 he's ordered. And I've heard he's naming them all after characters from William Shakespeare plays. I don't know a lot about Shakespeare. There's not much call for literature on the canal, but I do like the name. Portia, he's called her. She sounds foreign, like she's travelled the world. It is a pity she'll just be going to Wolverhampton and back. But the stuff she's carrying, that will have come from all over the world. And I do suppose she travels further than Mossdale here. You see, she just gets towed back and forth across the Mersey. She brings the stuff from the big ships over, and then we take it everywhere else. Oh, where are my manners? I'm Hattie Price, wife of Fred and mother of William and Albert, boatwoman on the Shropshire Union Canal. Well, I best get back to work. I do have to make sure Portia's looking her best for the superintendent's inspection. Tra.
I hope that came across okay. Fingers crossed, anyway, that you heard that. But you get the flavour, and it's as Heriberto mentioned in his introduction. You know, museums aren't about objects. Yes, the objects are important, but museums are about people. And what the objects do is put our users, our audience, our visitors in touch with people from the past. And that's what people want to see. They want to know what other people's lives were like. And so using something like this sort of technology, we can communicate a lot more in an easier way than perhaps the object on itself could just do. So it's been a very useful experiment. It's been a very useful project that we've done, and we're looking to repeat this, because once you've got the QR code or the sort of switch point, and as you can see on the middle picture, it's like a round circle that made the software work. You know, you can do this anywhere along the canal, anywhere you want to. You can put up a code and people can log into it. But there's more we're also exploring with our objects to get them explored when people aren't necessarily in the museum. Now, I'm going to talk a bit about this, but if you want to hold up your smartphone, your camera, to the QR code where it says scan me, it should take you through to a link. And this link will show you the Manchester Ship Canal matchbox. Now, I know it's not necessarily a very exciting object, but this is just to demonstrate what we can do. And again, maybe some of you are doing this already, but once you get that matchbox on your phone or your tablet and you let it download properly, you can touch the screen and move the matchbox round, so you can explore it from every angle. And we are starting now to build up our collection of objects with this in this format, so that we can make them accessible to people away from the museum site. I mean, the good thing is it's a much more effective marketing tool than just telling people to visit the museum. If you can show them what they can see, and you can really sort of impress them with how you're attracting their attention and make them want to come and visit. So if you've not had time to try that Scan Me QR code, again, you should be able to do it, I understand, when it comes through as a PDF. As well as that three-dimensional object, which you can turn and twist around, we're also undertaking photogrammetry. And this is partly because some of the boats we have in the collection are in such poor condition that they are beyond repair. We have to focus our limited resources on those vessels that we want to, or we are more important to look after. But what we can do with photogrammetry, and we're working with Liverpool University on this, is actually take sections of the boat and we can build the boat up. And again, if you follow the YouTube link, you will see that in practice. And it's a way that we can create a very accurate record of what that boat looked like. So even when the boat has gone because we cannot save it any longer, we actually have an accurate record of how it was built. And if in the future, when perhaps there's more money around, or someone's got lots of money, they want to build a replica, it will enable them to do that. But as I say, do follow those links and do have a look. Because from my point of view, in terms of trying to get the collections out and around the network, these are very good tools that we can use. We're trying to pull all these ideas together in a project called Unlocking Hidden Stories. And this is where actually we're working with staff in the Canal and River Trust in the first instance, because we want them to be the ambassadors for our collection and for our museums. So we're inviting them to come and look at our collection and choose an object which means something to them. It might be because predecessors in their role used to use that object as a tool. It might be because it has some sort of personal significance. It might be an emotional connection, or it might be just because they like what that object looks like. And we're building up, we're recording why they like that object and what they think about it. And we're building up that database of these recordings. And what we're working on now is doing three-dimensional photography on their chosen objects. And we will soon be linking up those objects onto the website with the recordings. So we're adding an extra dimension. It's a form of contemporary collecting. We're recording what people today think about these objects and why, and adding that to the content. And that builds up something which actually will have interest to a wider audience. Because again, it's about people, and it's about people talking about these objects and why they're important to them. And others can then engage and look at that object in a new light. So this is a project which is still underway, but it's got potential, and it will develop as we move forward. So do watch this space. So finally, I just wanted to conclude with some key points, I think we would say. And that is, both our natural and cultural heritage of the water can be used in a very proactive and positive way. We can really look at not just the learning that people have, and learning, of course, is important to people's well-being, but much broader aspects of well-being of our communities and individuals. And we should look, proactively in how we go about that. And you might want to think about how you engage audiences away from the museum, and what could you do, how you could use your collections. And again, you may have some examples which you want to talk about later. But I would say use all the tools available to you to achieve this. We have looked at getting objects physically out on the Canal towpath and engaging people in that way. And we have done it outside our museum at Stoke Bruin. But with COVID, it's challenged us to think differently. It's challenged us to think, how do we engage audiences without necessarily that physical contact? And the purpose, I think, really, the main thing to remember is make it relevant to your audiences. If it's relevant to them, they will engage. If it's something which is remote, you won't engage them. Thank you very much. Do we have any questions?